chrome-coated rings can last 75% longer than plain cast iron rings.
False.
False.
Only
All right, give me a qualifier. Do they last any longer at all, or why do we even use them?
Good. Good.
Hmm?
50%.
50%. 50%. Okay. The harmonic balancer is used to absorb the torsional vibrations created by the camshaft as the engine speeds up and slows down.
True.
false.
Sounds like
It's true.
true.
What does it do?
It balances the current.
Now, somebody give me some information about that. Is it used to absorb the torsional vibrations created by the camshaft? Camshaft?
Yeah.
I think two's
Oh,
true.
camshaft.
Camshaft?
Oh, okay.
Should be cranked.
Did you start reading the word and just blow past it?
No,
Oh,
me and
I-
Greg was in an argument back here about
Oh,
it.
never mind. Yes.
And he went with false and I went with true. That's why I kept saying that. But
It is false. It don't say crankshaft.
yeah.
You said crankshaft. I was like, yeah, it's
Probably
crankshaft.
saw art this
On the
morning.
paper it says camshaft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I would have missed that.
Over my head. Over my head.
Greg, you was right. You got me this time.
If it went over your head, it means you made the short list, right?
I did.
All right,
'Cause
the
it should-
crosshatch pattern in a cylinder should be at an angle of 20 to 40 degrees off the horizontal plane of the deck.
True.
That's more or less true. Yeah, in the crosshatch, meaning that whenever you're using your glaze breaker to go in there and get rid of the, the polished surface of that cylinder wall, you're going to go up and down with that glaze breaker really fast so that whenever it's cutting, it's going to have crosshatch. Now, why is that crosshatch even there? Why do you need that? Anybody tell me?
Full oil.
Yeah, oil's got to be in there, and that is that's a place where it kind of provides a little lubrication reservoirs all up and down that thing so that it keeps it from just scrubbing any metal on metal. All engine blocks can be bored 60 thousandths of an inch.
That is a lie.
That is totally not true. All engine blocks cannot be bored 60 thousandths.
Yeah,
Matter of fact, a lot of the times when the outside of that cylinder is pretty rough, and if you go 60 thousandths on some of them, you get into the water jacket. So you can't bore. And listen to this. There's a caveat on a question like that. When it says all or always or never, you typically are going to figure that one's going the wrong way. When installing pistons in an engine, you check the front markings before installation.
That is true.
And what do they look like? The front marking will be a notch on the front of the piston, or a little,
Yeah.
weird looking.
or it'll say an F
Yeah,
on the
do
front.
like you did on that Doom buggy that time.
Yeah, yeah. Except there was little arrows.
Yeah.
And on that Volkswagen
Volkswagen.
bug engine, I had built so many American engines in between the time, but I forgot that the front was supposed to be pointing toward the flywheel and not where the belt is. And I put the pistons in there backwards, and that thing was knocking. And my dad told me, he said, if you can stand to listen to it knocking, it'll outrun the stew out of one that's put together right. And it jerked the wheels off the ground, and it was really strong. But it eventually come apart, But those pistons are weighted in such a way to where they're gonna make a knocking noise, put them in there backwards. Whenever I was at Nissan over there talking to Lamont, I saw that they had several 4-cylinder engines they had pulled out of Altimas that they had over there in crates. And I said, what was those for? And he says, wrist pin noise. And he said they cover them to 60,000 miles. And so people are always, they don't like that racket. It ain't hurting anything. But people don't want to listen to it. So they, Nissan puts them an engine in. So there's a bunch of those Nissans getting engines for wrist pin noise. When installing pistons, you're going to check your front markings. So the installation of core plugs requires a non-hardening sealant. That is absolutely false. Core plugs meaning what we would ordinarily call what? But they don't, occasionally you'll see an engine, you'll see an engine freeze with water and it'll push one of those plugs out, but that's not what they're there for. They won't save the block. That's basically the way they have it in the jig whenever they cast it, and they have to put something in those holes, those core plugs to stop them up. And also what I used to do, when I was putting freeze plugs in, have any of you ever used Permatex, aviation Permatex, that stuff that looks like tar? And you paint it on there with a brush. And I used to, before I put a freeze plug in, I would paint that aviation Permatex all over it and all around the outside of it. And I would tell, and the guy that was working with me was saying, he's a Chevrolet nut, and he says, why are you putting that Permatex on the inside of that freeze plug? And I said, well, maybe it'll last longer before it rusts out again. And he said, well, that rust is already eaten through cadmium plating, you know. Of course, my idea was if you paint that Permatex on it, it's just going to make a better job out of the whole thing, because it's bound to protect it from the, you know, coolant. I don't know if it ever did or not. I couldn't, you know, give you any empirical evidence that I helped, but I had a good time. Technician A says cylinder liners that are cast in paste are called wet liners.
Oh,
Is he right?
I don't think.
Technician B says cylinder liners that are replaceable are called wet sleeves. That's a B, isn't it?
Boy.
He is correct. Piston skirt clearances can be as little as what?
Charlie.
5/10,000ths of an inch, which is 0.0005. That's 5/10,000ths of an inch.
It's small.
Yep. Aluminum blocks can be checked for cracks by, can you check an aluminum block for cracks by magnafluxing?
No.
I don't think,
Excuse me?
I don't think you can.
You know what magnafluxing is?
Yes.
I seen it in the book earlier.
Suffice to say, you sprinkle iron powder on the head, and then you grab it with a big magnet, and all of the iron filings on either side of a crack will stand up, or, you know,
Oh,
show you a
okay.
pattern. So if you check it like that, you'll see. But aluminum blocks, you have to use what? A dye penetrant and a black light. And
I want me a wooden block.
yeah, all the rest of that stuff's talking about magnafluxing. Tell you something else you do when you're checking pistons to see if they're cracked. And I wish I had a cracked piston to show you that. You take your piston, and is there a piston in here? Take a piston. This is a brand new piston here. And this buddy of mine that I worked with years and years ago at a filling station back in 1974, when most of y'all's folks hadn't even been married, but except for Greg's. Anyway, you tap on it with something like a pocket knife, and a piston that's not cracked will sound like that. But if it's got a dead cluck, cluck, cluck sound, it's got a crack in it. So you're going to feel it. It's going to have a different sound to it. So if you're checking pistons and you're tapping them, listening for the sound, you may not see the crack. Sometimes you will, but you may not see it, but you'll hear it when you're tapping on. You tap all the way around it. This is the piston skirt, by the way, right here. Right.
Oh, it is?
Now, what do you call this?
That's what the ring though.
Well, I know, but in between the ring, there's these, what do they call that?
Dang, I remember you told us that.
In between the ring, what is that?
Oh, man. Let me tell you tomorrow, Mr.
Is it the sleeve?
If you're gonna build a house, you have to buy some
Wood.
land. That's what that's called.
Land?
Yeah, that's a ring land. Those are lands. In between the grooves where the ring go is the land. Now, if you're gonna measure piston ring side clearance, you're gonna measure between the land and the ring with the ring in place, right? With a feeler gauge. That's side clearance. But don't get confused by that. If you're thinking, hey, piston ring side clearance, when you put the piston ring down in the cylinder and you measure between the ends of the ring where they come together, that's end clearance. And if you're putting rings in an engine nowadays, you better darn well measure that. Because I've known of piston rings coming brand new from the parts house, and we put them in there, they had no clearance. I mean, they'd go in there, but they didn't have any clearance. You know what happens then? You crank it up, it gets warm, it stops running. After 10 minutes, it runs, it quits running. And then after it cools off, it cranks up, it runs 10 minutes, it quits running again. Because the rings swell up and it just stops it. All right, so, but if you measure it, you know, it's supposed to have something like 1/1000th of an inch clearance in there. You know, and we had this one boy that built it, and he said, hey, can I build a 2.8 liter engine in my little Camaro? You know, I said, yeah, I guess so, you know. It always costs more than you think it's going to, though. We went in there and he found out his lifters were wore out, his camshaft was wore out. He had $1,200–1,500 in that thing time he got done. But the fact is, I said, you better check those things. He checked them. He didn't have nary a bit of ring clearance, end clearance on those rings, before he ever put it together, and he filed them, and he didn't have any trouble with it because of that. But anyway, I just wanted to cover all that while I was thinking about it. This is the kind of stuff I talk about while I'm thinking about it that you won't ever hear me say if you're not in theory class. Ain't that right?
Right.
How many of you would agree that it's important to be in theory class every day?
Yeah,
It is, isn't it?
pretty much.
You know, I'm trying to post most of these these videos on YouTube in case you need to go back and reference them. If you got a smartphone at home, you can do that. See. All right.
I have a dumb phone, man.
Technician A says the technician can gauge the degree of cylinder wear by the depth of the ring ridge. That's pretty accurate, isn't it? You know what the ring ridge is. Where is the ring ridge usually the worst? I understand that at the top of the cylinder. You don't know the ring ridge anywhere.
All my answers are wrong in theory today.
Yeah. Actually, no, it's going to be right behind the water pump. The cylinders that are closest to the water pump are going to have the worst ring ridge. That's probably because that's where it runs the coolest. And the cooler an engine runs, the faster it wears out. That's my theory. I don't know. Somebody else might think something different. But I do know that the ones that have ring ridges on the high tension rings they used to have, it'll right there behind the water pump, you'll have really bad ring ridges if it's got lots of miles on it. Nowadays, you don't have no ring ridge on hardly anything because they're using real low tension rings that's real skinny. And they're doing the job, but it's easier to spin the engine over and it gives you better fuel economy. Technician B says cylinders wear more on the non-thrust diameter than on the thrust diameter. Who's right about that?
A.
Okay, can anybody tell me what the thrust diameter is? What does that mean?
Thrust sound like something pushing.
It does. All right. Now then. Now you notice this one here, incidentally, has got an F for the front. That's the marking. It's also got a notch. So you're going to make sure you're looking at two different things right there. All right. Whenever your piston goes up and down like that, the thrust diameter is what? I mean, where is it? Where it's pushing, right? I mean, like if you got expanding gas and it's pushing it down that way, because of the fact that it's pushing the crankshaft. See that? Like that. So the thrust diameter is going to be. Think about the dynamics of that crankshaft. You know, you're going to have more tension on one side. And if you notice, a lot of pistons nowadays have got Teflon coating. There's a black colored coating on there. Yeah. And incidentally, I talked one time before about knurling pistons, and they knurl them right here. If the piston is a little bit, has got too much skirt clearance, you'll have piston slap, which means the piston's doing like this, you know, inside the cylinder making a racket.
Yeah, it'll probably make a noise.
Yes, sirree. Okay. All right. Technician A says that to measure cylinder taper, the technician should use a dial bore gauge and measure from the bottom of ring travel to the top of ring travel. Now, a dial bore gauge, what in the world happened to all my markers? There's one. A dial bore gauge has actually got 3 and 1, you know, and then it's got a stem coming off of here, up like that, and that's got a gauge on it right here. That's what that is. Now, I don't have one of those here for y'all to use. I need to get one. I probably need to go and buy one of them so you can. But anyway, whenever you put that down in your cylinders, you'll get, you know, you can read your cylinder taper by measure at the bottom, you measure at the top. Where's it going to be bigger? The taper, if it's a tapered cylinder, is it going to be bigger at the bottom or the top?
Top. This tapered cylinder is going to be bigger at the bottom, right?
Well, actually, where does all of the happening go on? At the top. So if it, you know, melts a little metal away, it's going to be at the top. Egg-shaped holes, because it's going to be, the egg-shaped holes are there because the piston's, you know, trying to push back and forth going up and down. If you're ever going to build an engine, listen to this. It's important. It depends on how deep you want to go. I don't know how many times we built engines whenever I was, you know, coming up from the 70s on up, where we would take the pistons out and clean everything up, make sure that we didn't have it in a sand bed and all that hogwash, and put rings and bearings in their own faith without measuring nothing. And you can get away with that about 40% of the time. But if you really wanted to do a good job, if somebody really wanted to build a good engine, they would go ahead and bore it 10 or 20 or 30 thousandths and put new pistons in it. You know, and of course measure everything when you're going up with it. And as you're putting it together, every time you torque something like a rod cap or whatever, you know, I'm sorry, when you torque your main caps, you're going to turn the crank through and see how it feels. It'll feel real smooth. And every time you put a piston in there and you torque another rod, you need to turn that sucker through and make sure it still turns free. Even at a factory, they have a turning torque test to make sure that something's not too tight.
I like the dyno stuff they got. They hook the motors up and
Yeah.
crank them and all that.
Yeah, they do that.
See how fast.
When I went to the Power Stroke diesel plant, I was walking through there. I went to the Power Stroke diesel plant the last time. I was the only journalist that they invited up there when they released the, the newest Power Stroke engine. And there was a bunch of tourists that were up there that were Power Stroke owners, and I was with them on the tour bus, and I went over to the plant. And I said, I'm going to, I was trying to join up with these people I was with, and the people at the plant stopped me, and they said, no, you're not going with them. And I said, well, what am I doing? They said, we got another guy that's going to show you around. I said, okay, whatever, so I wasn't used to that, because usually I went with everybody else. But he walked around the plant, and everywhere we'd go by, where they were, doing machining process and all this stuff, and there were people manning these machines. And, they'd throw up their hands, hey, how you doing? And he'd say, hey, Joe. And we get into the crankshaft machine. And boy, this was a big old massive Boehringer thing, and it had a screen up here, and it had all these numbers on it, and it was whirling around. It was throwing filings all over the place. They capture all the filings, and they go out the floor, through the floor, back to the foundry, and they recast them. So there's nothing on the floor anywhere. It's just spotless, And so I said, I would tell this crankshaft grinding machine is really interesting to me. And so the guy that was with me said, hey, Joe, shut down the crankshaft machine. Show this guy how this works. And so he shut it down, released it, boom, the crankshaft fell. He stopped the whole production process. And I said, when is this thing measured to make sure that it's, being machined? That the machining turned out right. He said, we don't need to measure it. He said, if it turns out later there's a tolerance problem, all I do is change the numbers up here, and the machine, fixes it right up. No, it's just real neat. Yeah. So I need to put it back together. When I got out of the plant, I went out there, and I'm waiting by the table for all these other people, or for the next tour bus to take me back to the, where I was supposed to be. And I said, that guy was really knowledgeable, and everybody seemed to really like him, the guy that I was going through the plant with. And they said, that was the plant manager. I didn't even know that's who he was. I'd had a lot more questions if I'd have known he was a plant manager. But he was a young-looking guy, kind of good-looking, from Venezuela. With his name is Sergio Segarbi or something on his shirt. But whenever he said something, people would snap to attention. I noticed that, even though everybody was friendly. I just figured they were friendly to each other. But the fact that they didn't have to measure that stuff was what was amazing to me. They could machine that crankshaft, and they knew it was right when it was done. Every single time, they did hundreds of them a day. Every 45 seconds. A Power Stroke diesel engine was coming off the plant up there every 45 seconds. That's how fast they're cranking them out. Okay, technician B says a 10,000ths taper is allowable. Technician A says the technician should use a dial bore gauge and measure from the top of ring travel to the bottom. That's true. Technician B says, is 10,000ths taper allowable? No. If you got that, you're going to need to bore that sucker. Right? Technician A says main bearing clearances are typically 8 10,000ths to 3 thousandths. 8 10,000ths to 3 thousandths. That's a pretty wide range, isn't it?
2 thousandths.
Technician B says crankshaft end play is typically between 2 thousandths and 4 thousandths. Who is correct about that? That's B. 3 thousandths of an inch is too much main bearing clearance. Now, you know how you measure that? You ever use plastic gauge? The plastic gauge, that little waxy string, you put it in there on your bearing, you torque it down, you pull it out, and how wide it squishes it tells you how much clearance you got. The most accurate way to do it. You can't do it any more accurate with that with a dial indicator or nothing else. When you tighten that sucker down, you ought to have no more than 1.5 thousandth clearance. If you got more than that, you're going to have noise. I like to see about 1,000, basically.
You need to start building more engines.
And don't build it dry, y'all. Use some assembly lube or something, grease or something on those bearings. Don't let it fire up dry. A lot of times you're going to prime it. It's a good idea to go ahead and spin it over with ignition system disabled. Of course, the way that me and Casey was doing on our Aerostar, we spun it over a whole bunch before we got it started up. So we had it primed with oil. Technician A says, excessive ring side clearance. What was I talking about when I said side clearance? Between what and what?
The land.
The ring and the land. That's right. Well, cause see, if somebody said it, just walked up to you before you study this and said, "What is ring side clearance?" You'd be thinking between the ring and the cylinder wall, or between something. You know what I'm saying? That's why you need to be knowing what these numbers are. Blow by and oil consumption. Technician B says the excessive ring side clearance could be caused by installing the wrong ring. How you like that? How you like that answer? Yeah. Blow by and oil consumption. And what else can cause that? What if you got all your ring gaps stacked on one side of the piston? That ain't good either, is it? you put rings on a piston, make sure that you got the ring gaps reversed. You know, because it'll make a little tiny leak all the way past all those ring gaps. You know, it needs to.
Blow by too, wouldn't it?
Huh?
That would cause blow by.
Yeah, it causes blow by, and you know, it can actually cut a trench down the side of the cylinder wall if it's bad enough. Some high performance engines with forced induction systems use what kind of aluminum pistons? Forged aluminum pistons. That means that somebody actually made a piston that wasn't a real piston, or what? Kind of like forging your signature or something like that?
It's
or-
stronger.
Yeah.
It's stronger. The last one, right?
Yeah.
I forget how it's made, but then like,
It's not the known for, it's like they grind it off, don't
Yeah, forged. That's a good little thing. That's a good little thing. What did everybody, you know, somebody like Amanda's making a really good shot at that. She's doing good on that. But everybody learned what it means when they say forged. If somebody's got a forged crankshaft.
Well, you know, some of those tools and wrenches that we use got forged, don't they?
Yeah.
Is that the same or?
Yeah. Well, what do you make stuff in a forge, right?
fire.
That's an assignment. I want everybody to tell me what that means. If somebody says I got a forged crank instead of what? What if it's not forged? What is it?
Cast iron?
It's cast, yeah. You know. So if it's cast, you know, they're actually pouring it into a mold and all that, I guess.
and forge is where they like molded themselves, right? Over fire.
Yeah. See if you can internet that. You know what I'm saying, at some point, and get to where you know what that means. If somebody says, "What's the difference?" You know, what if you got somebody that's really interested? What's the difference between? I mean, what does it mean when you say you got a forged crank? You know, what's
You
up
can
with
get
that?
a cast iron 33 striker, or you can get a forged 33 striker, and that forged one's gonna cost $2,000 more.
And then I'm going to say, well, what's
That's
that?
different.
I'm going to say, I know that the cost is different, but why? I mean, what makes a forged one better?
It's more durable, more powerful. Or more.
They had these Volkswagen Bug hot rod people, the old Volkswagen Bugs, used to have rods that had roller bearings in them that were made around the crankshaft. In other words, they didn't bolt together around the crankshaft; they were as a roller crank and all that. And you could tack that thing up to 13,000 RPM. You know, it was just, you could rev like there was no tomorrow. All right.
That's the real, but
The purpose of piston pin offset is to reduce the amount of piston what? Slap. All right, now listen to what I'm telling you. Remember when I put the pistons in backwards in the Volkswagen Bug? The noise that you were hearing was piston slap,
okay.
and it got louder and louder. Deck flatness should be checked with a what?
Straight edge.
Straight edge.
Straight edge, and that's not talking about a carpenter square, right? You got to have an actual straight edge that's designed
You
to
gotta
do
have
that.
filler gauge too, right?
Feeler gauge and a straight edge, that's right. Rod bearings will wear more on the which halves?
Upper,
Yeah, they're going to wear more than that. What about mains?
lower,
Lower, yeah, because they're pushing down. Everything's pushing down, right? All right. To install piston rings, a ring, what should be used?
expander.
Expander, but I will tell you this, you know, call me a lousy instructor, and I'm not talking against a ring expander, but I've never used one.
Compressor.
You got to be careful. No, the expander actually spring out, and so you can put it over the piston.
Yeah.
But if you're careful, you can put it on there without hurting it anyway. But you don't want to go scratching down the side of the piston with a corner of that ring. You know what I mean?
Put your initials on it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, it makes a mess on there. But it's a bad thing. I knew this one guy that was in a big hurry putting an engine back together over at the Ford place one time, and he put it together with no rings on one of the pistons. I don't know how he got there. You know, when we pulled the piston out, there was not any rings there. Whatever. No.
That made it feel real more.
Yeah, I know he did. That was funny too, because he was a guy that was telling me one time, and he sort of kind of looked like he was somebody you'd expect that would listen to rap music or something. But I said, he was saying, "Did you hear that Farley Taylor died? You know, the old Farley Taylor used to be on the radio, you know, that played these old songs like Too Late to Bring Pretty Flowers and all this kind of stuff."
No.
And I said, and he was always talking about RC colas and moon pies and all that kind of stuff. And so he said Farley Taylor died. And I said, well, I guess that's the end of them RC colas and moon pies. He goes, don't you talk bad about Farley Taylor. He's gonna slap me upside the head for saying something bad about Farley Taylor. I had no clue that he was even anybody that listened to Farley Taylor. To determine oil clearance, the technician should compare the
Squished.
The what? The squished
What is it? I couldn't find out one today.
plastic gauge. Plastic gauge looks like a little piece of waxy string, and it comes in a little sleeve. I can show you some. I think I got some somewhere around here. You just put a little piece of it on the place where you crank it, torque it down, see how much it squishes it out. Handiest thing. It don't cost but a couple of dollars. You buy it over at the parts house. Everybody's got it. Insufficient rod blank clearance usually indicates improperly installed rods.
Pass another one.
Side.
Side clearance. Yeah. Oh, well.
What you said was 19 Squished.
Yeah.
Everybody happy with all that? All right.
Are you happy now, Ben?
Squished.
Does everybody understand engines better now than they ever did before?
Yeah, I gotta rebuild this motor. And hopefully it drives.
Yep. What you gotta do if you
Oh, I
gonna
like that.
what you need to do if you rebuild the motor is make darn sure you have everything squeaky clean
Put my name on
and
it.
measure everything twice and make sure you don't forget to torque nothing. You know what I mean? You gotta be really careful. Take your time. Don't try to do it in a big hurry. That's the best advice I can give you. You learned enough, I think, to do that because you torn some engines apart and put them back together in here.